Just a quick heads up, this discussion is intended for people who are already familiar with the game. Pretty much all spoilers are on the table. If you want a recommendation, I definitely play the demo, and if you want 10 more hours of that, try the full thing. Also, you probably don't need the reminder, but the story covers some pretty dark topics. Alright, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Carno. I've never mentioned it till now, but I'm a somewhat frequent reader. I also enjoy my fair share of strategy and puzzle games. So it's probably unsurprising that I've been a fan of Ace Attorney for a while now. Exploring crime scenes and interviewing witnesses to build up a case is consistently satisfying, and battling for that case in court is equally as addictive. So when Nintendo announced that they were making a new murder detective game, my curiosity was piqued. I never played Famicom Detective Club before, but it seemed like that first half of Ace Attorney. And just based on the demo, the story had me hooked. Well, after having the chance to play the full thing, I'm somewhat sad to say that my feelings are fairly conflicted, and I'd like to take a little time to explain why. Just a quick note before we start, I did not plan on making a video on this game, so the footage you'll see will probably not correlate with what I'm talking about. It'll just be split up between the beginning and very end. So I'd recommend treating this as an auditory experience. Anyway, I have two main issues with how MeO is executed: the gameplay and the storytelling. Let's start with that first point. It's kind of a joke that visual novels have somewhat minimal interaction. After all, you're there to see a plot unfold. But I do think that this particular subgenre has a unique advantage. With it basically being a point-and-click adventure, you can really engage a player by making them look for background details, or consistently cross-check notes and evidence. And yeah, I'm going to be referring to Ace Attorney a lot here, not because I think they should be the same game, but because I think it just does the concept so much more justice, if you'll pardon the pun. I'm not even talking about superpowers here. I appreciate that FDC is more realistic, but let's take a look at your options. Engage, ask, look around, think, use your phone, open your notebook, and quit. Right away, this first option is a combination of the next two. You'll occasionally use it if there are multiple people at a scene, but I probably used it less than 10 times. You'll also get specific options, such as to take something or present someone with a clue. But they only appear in certain circumstances, and usually are just a way to advance a conversation. I think the most I could ever show someone was 2 things. As for looking around, you can usually get the protagonist's insight on something, but it doesn't often add much. And when it does, it just advances a conversation. Using your phone is also only used to advance the plot along. The notebook is good for personally keeping track of things, but is never actually used except in daily reviews. What this basically means is that you're going through a series of conversations where a thought will just end. So you go down the menu, seeing which sub-option the game wants you to pick. It's like you're trying to predict what the witness will talk about next. In the Ask and Listen section alone, you'll usually have 3 or 4 options. Only one of these will be correct, and sometimes the solution is to select Think, whereupon the protagonist will have some sort of observation and the witness decides to speak on their own. Or maybe a new conversation topic will appear. Again, it's not like any of this lets you steer the direction of the discussion. It's more like you're reading a book, and every few sentences you have to stop and predict what the next sentence will be. Then, at the end of the day, you get to review your notes. Is this when you draw new conclusions? Sometimes, but often it just has you selecting keywords from your notebook or filling in the blank. And it's not like you're connecting any puzzle pieces here. It's more like when a school teacher gives a basic reading comprehension quiz to make sure everyone read last night's chapter. And more often than not, the conclusion is that we can't make any conclusions. Now, don't take this to mean that the game was ruined by these systems, but again, it basically means that you're just doing the minimal amount of participation. It's like they overcomplicated some things to make up for a lack of real stuff to do. Contrast this to Ace Attorney, where you can present evidence at any time and a dialogue option sees a thought through to completion. Not to mention the mini-games and scene searching. Some people will be fine with this gameplay, and personally, I was willing to go through it to see how the story went. But let's talk about that. One thing I found interesting was that we're tasked with solving a fresh murder and a series of unsolved cases from 18 years ago. Was this a copycat murder or the return of the same serial killer? And for a good way through, I found the pacing pretty good. I was being drip-fed new information and felt that before long, I could start making some guesses. But then the story just decided it was done? We had so many threads we need to follow. Who was Minoru? Why did Makoto disappear, and why was he recognized as Minoru by the construction worker? Kuze's obviously involved, but we don't know how, and she's not telling anyone. Why was the first murder different from the others 18 years ago? Who called Isuke out to the woods to be murdered? What about Utsugi's findings? All of these threads could lead to us finding more pieces of the puzzle. But by the 11th chapter, we have only really filled out the edges. Then, when we discover Minoru's hideout and find Kuze, the game is basically forced to give about 15 minutes of exposition covering all the different aspects of Isuke's murder. But even then, it still doesn't leave all the details filled in, so after the credits roll, it lays out another hour of backstory that Utsugi finally decides to share. A good story should lead the player to the answer without making it obvious. But not only does this one give us about half the info we need, but it also tries to lead us in the wrong direction. For example, Megumi explains how she got into an argument with Usuke the night before, and consequently thought that he caused his own death. This understandably devastates her for almost a full week. Just think how you would feel as a 14-year-old if you thought you caused your best friend to die. Good thing it was a homicide. After all, you can't put a bag on your head if you're dead. Plus, that bag was the same one from the second and third murders 18 years ago. That's definitive proof, right? You even interview Kohei later, who said he was acting depressed, and everyone basically tells you to dismiss the fact. So up until the last monologue, we're working under the assumption that it was a murder. Only for Kuze to reveal that she actually had an old bag that Emio wore and messed with the crime scene, all in an attempt to reopen the old Emio cases with the hopes that they'd find her missing brother. So first of all, sorry Megumi, but I guess you really did influence Isuke to end it. But more pressing, how is anyone supposed to figure that out when you lead them in the opposite direction? And just to tie in this point, Kuze is not a good sympathetic character. I know she was spending years trying to find Makoto, but she refused to cooperate with the detectives willing to help her, intended to kill one of them, and tampered with a middle schooler's scene of death. That's a whole different level of deranged. And her response to all this? Oh yeah, sorry guys, but I'm retiring from my job and helping my brother now, so that's my penance. Considering she only became a detective to hunt her brother, she's basically getting away scot-free after tampering with a self-murder scene and wasting the police's resources for 2 weeks straight. In terms of the cases 18 years ago, we learn almost nothing new about them either. We're told to track down Minoru, but we only find out his old workplace and that he was at a juvenile detention center at some point. Everything else we basically learned from Utsugi in the postgame. Maybe it's because the content was so dark? I mean, they straight up made it optional and warn you as such, but the game is already rated M. So just to reiterate, my 3 main objections are that we aren't given enough information, we're purposely led down the wrong path, and Kuze fails to be a sympathetic villain, despite what the game seems to want. So not only was the gameplay subpar, but the full story of Minoru, moving as it was, almost works despite the 10 plus hours of gameplay prior. Hence why I would say Emio is not good at its storytelling. Combine this fault with the lack of quality gameplay, and I honestly don't think I can say this game lives up to its potential. In fact, it kind of feels like we play as a side character while Utsugi is the real protagonist. I would have definitely loved to see the gameplay flip between all 3 of the detectives. As it stands though, I hope they make a sequel that at the very least fixes the gameplay, and preferably has less conversation over milk tea too. Anyway, that's the end of my thoughts on this rather niche subject. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.